Bosses. They're supposed to be hard. They're kind of a natural checkpoint to see if you've learned everything you're supposed to learn up until now in the game. Because sometimes it just goes a little too far and the developers decide, well, let's maybe scale it back a bit. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 20 bosses so hard they had to be nerfed. Let's start this off at number 20 with Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree's Radahn. Probably the most notable boss nerf in the past couple of years. Of course, I'm talking about the final boss of the Elden Ring DLC. At the time of release, this fight was absolutely ridiculous. It was, to an extent, one of the hardest bosses From Software has ever done. Up there with stuff like Orphan of Kos and the Sword Saint. He was crazy aggressive, hit like a dump truck, and his second form especially was such a blinding light show that it was hard to tell what was even going on with some of his attacks. Even Hardened Souls veterans were shook by this guy and did what all true gamers do when faced with an overwhelming challenge. They went online to complain about it. In this case, it was understandable, because while the rest of the DLC is definitely very challenging, the final boss was a step beyond that. Not even summoning really helped. In fact, the guys you summon were originally so weak, having them around will only make the boss harder. They do almost nothing, and then they die, and then you'd be stuck with a Radahn that has significantly more health because of the balancing mechanics related to summoning. So eventually, From relented and made some changes. First with patch 1.13, which considerably buffed up the guys you could summon, then in patch 1.14, where they just straight up made Radahn significantly easier by making him do less damage, slowed down some of his attacks to make them easier to avoid, and made him just less aggressive overall. Oh yeah, and the light beams in his second form were made less eye-searing, so overall it's a smoother experience. Still hard as hell, but just a little less unfair. And number 19 is Viper / Maluka from Kazan, the first Berserker. In this uncertain world, only a few things are for sure. Water is wet, the sky is blue, and bosses and Souls-likes get nerfed. It's like clockwork. A new one of these things comes out with an overtuned boss that appears way too early in the game. Everyone complains and the developer panics. In the case of Kazan, maybe it was for the best. On day one, the developers nerfed, and they specifically used the word nerf in their patch notes, two bosses, Viper and Maluka. It should come as no surprise because both of these guys were stage 2 bosses that proved to be way too much for players. The devs specifically call out Viper as a newbie killer, and I can see it. The guy appears in Mission 3. He's basically the game's third boss, and they're throwing endgame level Sekiro battle stuff at you that early in the game. Part of what makes Kazan's boss situation so absurdly difficult is they both require a high level of precision and skill to beat them, and it's a heavily parry-focused game. So they have all these absurd boatloads of health bosses that force you to perform at extremely high levels for an uncomfortably long time. The bosses in this game are like trying to cut down an oak tree with a teaspoon. It just takes a long time. Technically you can, but a teaspoon, man, it's not a fast way of doing it. They didn't exactly specify what was done to make these guys easier, just that they were adjusted, but it looks like they got nerfed across the board with lower health, lower damage, healing, easier attacks to avoid and deflect. I read the patch notes. I think it's a good thing because these guys really stood out as unnecessarily difficult compared to everything else you fight in the first half of the game. And number 18 is Baltus from Armored Core 6, another one of those newbie killers. A real step up in difficulty in the early parts of Armored Core 6. This is a guy with a giant missile pod ring around him that attacked absurdly fast, hit so hard it was normal to die without really having any idea what happened. 1 second you're alive, and the next you're not. With patch 1.02, the difficulty on this guy got adjusted, along with a few other bosses which were also tough, but obviously this was the real focus point, because he gave so many players so many problems for, up until the patch. The main change appears to be his missile tracking, which is a lot less aggressive post-patch, which means they're a lot easier to dodge overall. These things used to be an absolute nightmare to avoid, and there were absolutely tons of them, and it required highly specific maneuvering and a little bit too much luck to get away from the unscathed. Now it's just a matter of boosting and dodging like crazy, and you should be able to avoid them, which makes the fight much easier overall. It's a minor change, but it improves your chances of beating this guy significantly. And number 17 is Captain Y's voice from Black Myth Wukong. Out of all the pretty difficult boss fights in Black Myth Wukong, it's a little surprising to see that the only one that actually got their stats lowered was this guy. The boss at the top of the Pagoda Realm. You know, whatever this is, that guy. Compared to stuff like the last boss or the secret last boss, this guy's nothing special, but considering his status as basically a mini-boss with no real significance to the plot or story, he was surprisingly tough in the unpatched version of the game. It didn't take much for him to kill you, and his bizarre appearance made it hard to tell what he was about to do most of the time. He was also a progress boss, so you couldn't continue until you beat him, so players struggled with this guy, and that would make them essentially stuck. He's not a climax boss or an important character or a special secret fight. He's just a thing that blocks your way, so I can see why they singled him out to get nerfed. There's just no reason for him to be as hard as he was. And number 16 is the Archduke in Lies of P. In its first 2 weeks, this game was practically an entire different game in terms of difficulty. The unpatched version of this game is frickin' relentless. After the first round of patches, the challenge was, it was significantly lowered across the board. A lot of the game's early bosses had their health clopped down, aggressiveness lowered, and their damage output minimized. And I'm not just talking about one or two bosses, I mean pretty much most of them. The latter half of the game is obviously more difficult, but the first bosses all got nerfed to hell and back. Especially the ones with multiple health bars. I could just about put anything on this list, but I want to single out the Archduke for this one because the original version was just brutal. It had two forms, both of which had a ton of health, and it had a lot of unconventional attacks that made it hard to avoid taking damage, and it was just relentless. I mean, it was hard to heal yourself sometimes. This thing, it was early in the game, too, in all seriousness. Post-patch, much easier, both because your character just got a lot of huge buffs from the patches, but also because they lowered this thing's health by a pretty fair amount, making it a lot faster to kill, which is, it's a huge factor in a parry-heavy game like this. The less time you spend killing a boss, the less you are to be likely to screw up. As far as boss nerfs go, Lies of P was one of the more extreme examples of this sort of thing. Ultimately, it's probably for the best. I don't think the game necessarily benefited from being so brutally hard at first, but it is weird seeing a game change this much post-launch. And number 15 is Samur from Doom Eternal, The Ancient Gods Part 1. Doom Eternal, tough game. DLC, however, something else. They really went overboard with the difficulty in Part 1 of the DLC. It was so overtuned that it actually ended up being harder than the second part, which naturally should be more difficult, but inexplicably wasn't. There are a few reasons for that. Stuff like the spirit enemies introduced in Part 1 were just a huge pain in the ass, while Part 2 downplays them and introduces different enemy types that look more intimidating but are actually easier to deal with. Spirits are enemies that possess other enemies that make them stronger and way faster, and overwhelmingly fast. And their most annoying aspect is one really specific weapon attachment is the only thing that kills them. And I don't mean a weapon, I mean a weapon attachment. Meaning to fight these things, you can't waste plasma gun ammo, and you have to have the microwave beam attachment equipped at all times. I'm bringing this up because guess what? They play a major part in the most infuriating boss in the entire game. Sammer, I don't know if I'm saying that right, and I don't care. He's the final fight in the Ancient Gods Part 1, at least pre-patch, and he's easily the hardest boss in the entire game, if not the entire Doom series. He's got 5 forms, many of which involve him becoming invulnerable to all damage, and you're forced to hunt down and kill 2 spirits in order to make him vulnerable. The arena is as much a pain in the ass as he is, throwing lasers and fire traps all over the place, while you got to also deal with the boss and the possessed enemies, including some of the most miserable enemies in these games. These eyeballs that frankly do unfair amounts of damage if you don't take them out the second they appear. This guy's way harder than the literal Dark Lord of Hell, and there's no reason for him to be that hard, so he got nerfed to hell and back, and now he's way more tolerable. At number 14 is King Dice from Cuphead. This infamously difficult boss is maybe the toughest in the whole game, slightly edging out the devil himself as the most painful fight in all of Cuphead. How you fight this guy is unusual. Instead of the standard fight, you get a board and a dice that you roll. Depending on where you land, you have to fight a mini-boss, or if you're lucky, you get some free help. At the end of the board, there's the classic old-school board game BS trick. The space right before the last is the start over square, and it's exactly as cruel as it sounds. Land on that square, you're back to the start, and you have to go through the whole board again. Whippy.
This match will get red hot. Here goes.
Originally, there was no end to the amount of times you had to go back. If your luck was bad, you could be stuck running the course 2 or 3, even 4 times. It's unlikely. You'd probably die way before that happens, but it could happen. With patch 1.1.3, the developers offered one of their few mercies and made it so the start over square only triggers once per fight, so you're not dooming yourself to be trapped in the loop forever just because of a bad roll of the dice.
Good day for a 12 battle. And begin.
At number 13 is Zhang Lang from Wolong Fallen Dynasty. Up till this point, a lot of the bosses I've been talking about appear relatively early in the game, but this guy's pretty unique. At launch, he was maybe the second hardest boss in the game, only to Lu Bu. That's right, Mr. Do Not Pursue himself was the only harder boss, but for some reason, Zhang Lang was the first boss. I don't know why he was the first boss. It's not even the first real boss. Like, some games have a prologue boss or something. Give you a little training on the game mechanics. This guy's not the boss of the prologue. You fight him 15 or so minutes into the game, he's crazy hard. Pre-patch is just shocking how tough this guy is. He's the first fight, and now he's got a second for him? Before you've even got the hang of the controls, they're throwing crap at you. How hard's the rest of this game going to be? The answer is not nearly as hard. Kind of a sick joke. It made absolutely no sense that this guy was so difficult, so they correctly nerfed him into oblivion. Still, I cannot help but wonder how the game managed to ship the way it did. Who in their right mind makes a 40-hour Souls-like and makes one of the hardest bosses first? At number 12 is the Traitor Lord from Hollow Knight. Compared to most of the other bosses on this list, this guy isn't anything to write home about. But the Traitor Lord is one boss who is kind of infamous for some players. He's not all that complex or anything. He only has a few attacks he cycles between. The small arena makes things challenging, and he originally had a whole lot of HP, which made the fight drag on way too long. There was no save point near this guy either. He's just, you reach him, you had to do some perilous platforming, so a lot of players were starting this fight at a disadvantage. It was just kind of a pain boss, like, just sucked. And a few other bosses along with this one all got their health bars nerfed and made them easier to kill. And while the devs arguably went a little overboard with some of the other bosses, the Traitor Lord just had too much health originally. Just a major slog of a fight. And number 11 is the Matriarch from Gears 5. It's one I wasn't able to verify because it's seemingly impossible to find patch notes that go all the way back to when Gears 5 originally released. They're not on the wiki or on the game's official page. It's not on Steam. So I'm forced to rely on secondhand sources here and my own recollection. But going back and fighting this boss again recently, it seems like the speculation's correct. This boss got nerfed. And thank God, because the original version of the Matriarch was one of the most annoying bosses in any third-person shooter. The gimmick is real simple, and in a sensible game, this fight would be over in a few minutes. The idea is the boss tries to ram you, so you shoot the ice under and trap it to make it vulnerable for a few seconds, rinse and repeat.
Hey! It knows where you are! Now's our chance! Shoot us back!
Simple, but for whatever reason, they originally made this thing a massive damage sink that takes forever to kill. On top of that, breaking the ice was inconsistent, so sometimes it wouldn't get stuck, even though it seemed like you 100% got it. And when that happened, you'd almost always end up dead because there's not enough time to dodge out of the way. Patches made this thing a lot easier, making it closer to how it should be. It dies a hell of a lot quicker for one, and the ice breaking seems more consistent. That's all they really needed to do to turn this from one of the most infuriating bosses to, just another boss, and I mean that in the best possible way. At number 10 is Sigrun from God of War in 2018. The Valkyrie Queen is the hardest fight in the reboot, and she's maybe still the toughest thing in the series so far. This thing's absolutely relentless, with attacks that all the other Valkyries sort of combine and have a massive health bar. In this case, the patch wasn't meant to nerf the boss, just fixed a bug that made this fight harder than it needed to be. So they have this stomp attack, okay? It's the worst. They grab you out of nowhere, and they just stomp Kratos into the dirt. It's a supremely annoying attack that originally only had one miserable surprise. It was quite a surprise, though. It also made it so you couldn't use a revive stone if you got killed by the stomps. Most people assumed it was intentional, that it was just another way for this boss to be unfair, but it was actually recognized as a bug in the patch notes as it was removed. So now the game lets you come back to life after a stomp attack. It's not much. The boss is pretty much the same otherwise, but it really helps. And number 9 is Lord Brevin from Freedom Planet. You'd think a cute little Sonic-inspired platformer like this would be pretty easy going, but no. The guys behind this game did not just take inspiration from Sonic, they also incorporated a lot of elements from treasure games like Gunstar Heroes and Alien Soldier and stuff like that. Basically, the bosses in this game can and will constantly kick your ass. The final boss is especially cruel. The first time you fight him, it's an inexplicable, what the hell just happened event. He annihilates you in seconds, and this is the patched version I'm talking about. It used to be worse. How is this possible, you ask? Because his attacks used to be completely random. Now, at least on normal, his attacks come in a specific pattern. It's one thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing, and then it resets. Because of that, it makes it possible to anticipate what he's going to do next and react to it. In the original version, it wasn't. All of his attacks were completely random, so you were just screwed. It's insane. This grab has no tells, does a ton of damage, happens in a split second. Just could happen at any time, too. Nothing else about the boss was changed. It's just their attacks are no longer random, and it made it so the space between the attacks was slightly, just tiny bit longer. But even that makes this final boss so much easier. And number 8 is Safer Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII. If you didn't know, back in the day, the only real patches that games got were new printings or changes made to a game when it was released in a new region. Often, Japanese gamers were kind of the petri dish, and things would be fixed, or even new content would be added in the international version of the game to make something make sense. And then they use that as an excuse to re-release the game in Japan as sort of an enhanced edition as well. Final Fantasy VII is one of those games. The North American release added a few super bosses into the mix, but more importantly to our purpose, they adjusted the difficulty of the final boss, say for Sephiroth. In the original Japanese version, his attack pattern was different. He'd use a few spells like Slow and casted Flare instead of the weaker Shadow Flare that he uses in the North American release. But most importantly, his ultimate attack, Supernova, was way more dangerous in the original game. In the North American version, the Supernova, it's flashy as hell. I mean, it's a spell where it's literally blowing up planets, but the actual damage it inflicts isn't quite as intimidating because it's entirely percentage-based, meaning it will never actually kill you. In the Japanese version, the spell was a lot less flashy for one thing, but more importantly, it did a flat amount of damage, and it was a lot. This attack was devastating in the Japanese release. I was quite thankful when I learned about this. That's not the game I played. The North American version of the fight's way more forgiving. They basically patched it before patching games was even a thing. Moving on to number 7, Rom the Vacuous Spider from Bloodborne. From can be cagey about patch notes. There's many instances, especially with their earlier games, where bosses got patched, but they're not listed in the patch notes. This is an example of that. It's not like 100% confirmed or anything, but it's obvious if you played the game back at release and come back to it now. Like Baltius, the major thing that got patched was tracking. In Armored Core was the missiles. In Bloodborne is the meteors. In the base game, Rom was still a pretty easy boss, but those meteors would come and get you by surprise, and it was essential to remain close to it so that it didn't try to use that ranged magic on you. In the patch version, the meteors are still dangerous, but they just scatter randomly, like they should, rather than homing in on your ass, which is what they shouldn't do. It's still a perfectly beatable boss in its original form, but those meteors were extremely annoying and really only made the fight feel more like you just die randomly sometimes, which is super frustrating. And number 6 is Onryoki. Forgive the pronunciation. Anybody who played the original Neo beta knows that this guy was an absolute freaking menace, though. I don't know what it is with Team Ninja making their first bosses so hard, but they do it. Technically, this guy's the second boss, but it's one of those situations where the first real boss, the London Tower guy, is more like a slightly tougher standard enemy. This is a unique fight. What makes this guy such a nightmare is that, 1, he's in a weirdly tight space for such a big boss, and 2, the tracking on his balls is insane. I, like many of you, live in the real world. You know, where the laws of physics dictate that when an object is thrown through the air, it retains a steady trajectory. Not so here. I'm sorry, I'm cracking myself up over this Neo shit. This big bastard can chuck giant metal balls at you that track you like they're homing missiles, okay? It makes absolutely no sense and is a huge pain in the ass to avoid because if you haven't noticed, they're real big. These are the balls AC/DC was talking about. The full game weakened this guy a lot, mostly nerfing the tracking on his projectiles, but it seems like he's just overall easier in the full game. Still a pain for new players, but compared to the beta, he's a lot more fair. And number 5 is Lothar in Wolfenstein Youngblood. This game's kind of the black sheep of the modern Wolfenstein games, unfortunately kind of for a good reason. It's meant to be a side game, sure, but it's too much of a departure from what people want out of these games. Also, there's way too many bullet sponges, like the last boss, who is the king of all bullet sponges. In the original release, this guy was a nightmare. He's a tiny target flying around this visually noisy arena that takes about 1 million bullets to kill, but who can take you out in seconds, sometimes from things you can't see, as the entire arena is getting bombarded while you're trying to kill him is grueling to fight, and it takes like 30 or so minutes to clear solo. Just drags on forever. And if you die at any point, you gotta restart the entire fight from the start. Fun. Don't blame anyone for giving up right then and there. You slog through the rest of the game. This is just too much. Thankfully, the developers eventually came to their senses and added in checkpoints, so dying is way less punishing in this one than it used to be. That's basically all that was changed, but that alone makes the battle so much easier.
I just want you to know, love you, sis. Love you too, Jen. Could use some help over here. I ever tell you you're the best sister in the world? You just did. Watch it. He's called for air support. Going down, Jess. Need some assistance over here.
Nothing can stop the first flash!
And number 4 is Cthulhu from World of Warcraft. For years, this guy was considered one of WoW's most difficult boss fights, and that's post-patch. Before getting adjusted by Blizzard, he was even tougher. So, literally so much so that players consider his original form to be mathematically impossible to beat, no matter how good your team was. He could literally not be beaten. At least that's the theory. The facts seem to show this is most likely true. Cthulhu was added to the game in January, and nobody managed to beat him until April, and only after Blizzard adjusted some of the boss's parameters. And this is WoW we're talking about. It's not like raid parties weren't trying to beat this guy all day, every day. The most elite players were throwing everything they had at him and never managed to best it until Blizzard came in and made things easier. And number 3 is the final boss of Descent. Going way back with this one. Probably one of the first bosses ever to get a literal patch to fix the difficulty. For the developers of Descent, the 6 degrees of motion FPS, difficulty wasn't really ever a concern. The game was super difficult by design. But the last boss wasn't just absurdly hard, it was actually literally impossible. Somehow the final boss was bugged in such a way that it was not possible to kill. You could not damage it for whatever reason in the released version of the game. So they released a patch that actually made it possible to kill it. I did not know this until a couple of years ago, I might add. And I was big into Descent when I was a kid. And I could never beat that last boss. I haven't tried since I found out, but yeah. Moving on to number 2, the Pandemonium Warden from Final Fantasy XI. One of the most infamous boss fights in any MMO proved to be so difficult that it was literally making players sick trying to fight it. There were guilds running this thing for 18 hours straight, not getting anywhere. That's 18 of some of the best Final Fantasy XI players fighting this boss nonstop for nearly a full day, and then even they couldn't pull it down. And I'm not talking about wipes or resets or anything. I mean one fight going on for 18 hours straight. People were starting to get sick. There were reports of people vomiting and fainting. It was just way too long fighting a single boss. When news of this ridiculous boss got mainstream attention, Square Enix knew they had to do some damage control, so they heavily reworked this guy along with another seemingly impossible boss, Absolute Virtue, and making him so much easier, along with giving every raid boss a 2-hour spawn timer, meaning the fights can never drag on longer than 2 hours at a time. It took some extraordinary attention to make some of the bosses from Final Fantasy XI actually sensible challenges, but at least they got there. And finally, at number 1, Frostinator from Juka and the Monophonic Menace. Never heard of this one? Neither have I. Kind of looks like a bog standard Zelda knockoff, and that's kinda, I guess, what it is. It's not a hidden gem or a forgotten classic, it's just kind of a mediocre and especially forgettable Game Boy Advance game. It also has a boss that literally cannot be beaten under any circumstances. This guy called Frostinator will never die if you're playing the original PAL version of the game. There's a glitch that means that the boss won't spawn the thing you need to kill it. So yeah, that's the end of the game. Sorry if you bought it, but you can't win. Period. Ever. Don't even try. And as far as I can tell, the PAL release was never fixed either. They did patch the North American release that came out a year later, and they fixed the boss so the game isn't literally broken, so at least us Americans could complete the game we paid for. That's nice. I mean, a lot of this, honestly, is stuff like that, though, where the challenge was unfair and there was really no purpose to leaving it that way. We live in a world where you can make changes to things now, so why not make the game better, right? And that's all we've got for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. So click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter and book me on Cameo at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on Gameranx.